Welcome back. I'm joined by Dr. Patrick Moore, and he's unpacking his latest book, Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. Dr. Moore, thanks again for coming on. In your book, you refer to the unified theory of scare stories. What is this theory?
The theory is, I think, pretty solid. Most of the scare stories today, Tanya, are based on things that are either invisible, like carbon dioxide, radiation, and whatever is supposed to be bad in GMOs, which doesn't have a name and therefore doesn't actually exist, and or remote. Polar bears and coral reefs, the reason they are the icons for climate change scare stories is because nobody can see for themselves hardly. How many people go and snorkel on the Great Barrier Reef? How many people go and count the polar bears in the Arctic? So when something is so far away that you can't observe it, and this comes down to the main point, science begins with observation. Anything anybody says where there's no observation involved, either with your eyes or your other senses, or with instruments like radiometers and meters of various sorts, telescopes, microscopes, if you can't see it or observe it, you can't call it science. Because after that comes the repetitiveness of doing it over and over and over again to make sure that you really are looking at a cause-effect relationship.
Correct.
What science is about is determining the difference between a situation like, for example, ice cream consumption and shark attacks are highly correlated. Many things are correlated where it isn't a cause-effect relationship.
Right.
So there's a website called Spurious Correlations, which is really quite humorous because it's amazing how many things that are obviously not cause-effect are correlated very strongly. And so the next stage after that, after you've said, yes, I believe I have found a cause-effect relationship, you put it out to other scientists to test it themselves. And if they see it, it becomes a theory, if they believe what you said is true. So that's how science works. And with CO2, nobody can see it. Nobody can observe what it's doing. And so you can make up any kind of story you want about it. And the truth is the whole thing is upside down. This is the Pleistocene ice age that we are in now. It is an interglacial period, but it's still colder now in this interglacial period than it has been for virtually 90% of life on Earth. We know that for a fact. It's well documented. In addition, CO2 has come to the lowest level it ever was during the last major glaciation, which was 20,000 years ago. And since then, it rose back up a bit. But it's never been lower in the history of the Earth. It was 10,000 parts per million at one time when life emerged in the sea into multicellular life forms, the Cambrian explosion of life. That was nearly about 500 million years ago. Since then, CO2, with ups and downs, has gradually declined and declined and declined. The temperature hasn't followed that at all. It's just gone up and down and up and down and up and down from hot periods to cold periods.
Well, that was my next question, because, we hear a lot from some scientists in the news, from politicians, that the rise in CO2, which sounds like you're disputing that point, that it impacts the Earth's temperature. Is that true? The rise in CO2 would have an impact on the Earth's temperature?
Theoretically, it may have a minor impact, but there are so many other factors that can override it completely. So it's not a major factor. We know that for sure from the history of CO2 and temperature. But the most important fact is that carbon dioxide is the basis of all life on Earth. We are carbon-based life, and all that carbon comes from CO2 in the atmosphere and the oceans. Over the years, that has been drastically reduced to the point where during the last interglacial period, it went down to 180 parts per million, which is only 30 parts per million above where plants start to die. We have actually come in at a time, inadvertently, we're using the fossil fuels for energy, not to make CO2. But the fact that we have made this CO2 has basically reversed a trend that would have ended life on Earth.
So our use of fossil fuels is having a positive benefit?
Yes, it is. The fact is, every molecule of CO2 we put into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels came from the atmosphere in the first place. It was buried in the ground as plants and forests and sea life and became oil, coal, and gas. All of it is of life origin. That life put carbon into the ground. And the shellfish in the sea, this is actually the biggest contribution to removing the CO2. Shellfish, including coral reefs, are made of calcium carbonate.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there. We have to cut to commercial, but I want you to unpack that point in just a few moments.